Hi, I'm Rosie Lewis. I'm from an organisation called the Angelou Centre. We're a black and minority women's organisation based in the north east of England. We've been using CEDAW in our work with women in a more concentrated way, probably since February 2019, although we've always tried to integrate aspects of CEDAW. We didn't really think about how we could do it in a more practical and pragmatic way. So now we're starting to integrate it into our direct work and training with women. We do, at the Angelou Centre, we've got a lot of work around violence against women and girls. We do a lot of training, we do social activities, and we're an open access centre. So we get a lot of women that we're working with who English as a second language is spoken at all. 60% of the women we work with might have uncertain immigration status. So we work with a lot of women who have multiple imposed barriers. So we'd not thought about how we could practically integrate CEDAW more in our day-to-day work, but we're starting to do more of that. We do more of it in terms of thinking about how we represent women in casework, how we bring CEDAW articles into our work to make sure that we're referencing different aspects of CEDAW when we're representing or supporting women. And we're making sure that in our training with women, direct training with women, that we bring in an understanding around CEDAW and that we integrate that into understandings around women's rights and how useful CEDAW is. We also have started to do it at a strategic level because many institutions and local authorities, statutory agencies, for instance, don't understand CEDAW and don't even recognise it necessarily in terms of it being a mechanism that should be adhered to or listened to in relation to women's rights. So that's been really important. So, and that works both ways because it's a good way of educating other people who have privileged positions of power, but also it's a good way of making sure that we're able to better represent underserved and women, but women that are more marginalised and minoritised as well. I think one of the main things is that there is no obligatory duty at the minute for the UK government to be upholding really basic human rights and women's rights issues, and to be making sure that women's issues and women's rights are absolutely central and on the agenda. I think that what you find is that women's rights and CEDAW being particularly useful because it brings in that intersectional understanding around women's rights, find that becomes very marginalised in favour of other issues and other things. So for instance, if we look at poverty, there'll be general kind of attention paid or discussions around poverty and austerity, but without really looking at the nuances about how that affects women in a much more punitive way. Particularly women of colour, particularly women from working class backgrounds, etc. So, or women who are stuck in zero contract hours, or women who have children. So again, it's about kind of being able to better utilise an obligatory way of thinking of using CEDAW in relation to women's rights. I think that women often feel passionately about what's wrong and what's happening around them, but I think something that I'm really aware of is feminism becomes a very theoretical thing for a lot of women, and they might not want to use the word feminist, they might not look at things in terms of human rights, they might not understand, but they know integrally, they have an integral understanding about inequality and fairness, because often women are marginalised and minoritised and are at the brunt of inequality. So I think CEDAW is really great at giving a structure and a language and a way of thematically organising the many oppressions that women from very different backgrounds face. As I've said before, I think it's a really good way of intersectionally analysing women's rights and women's oppression, to make and it's a way that we can bring minoritized, marginalised women to the fore and centralise their concerns. I also think it's a very powerful thing when we've worked with the women at the Angelou Centre around CEDAW, and we've started to train particularly young women and women survivors to better understand CEDAW. They have been so happy that to have a language, but to also know that there's a whole set of structures, legislation, that there's lots of things interlinking and lots of mechanisms and structures that should be being used to protect them and protect their rights. And it's a way of seeing inequality in a structured way, and it's much easier for women to be able to translate their particular issues and concerns through something that has international recognition. And I think it gives a lot of power and leverage to fundamental issues around women's rights being upheld. I think it gives that international leverage. I think it gives a structure around many of the issues that affect women on a day-to-day basis. I think that it can centralise minoritized women and marginalised women. And I think that it's a really good way of bringing together so many different concerns that often become quite stratified, that often become quite fragmented, particularly because so many people who are working around women's rights and human rights tend to be very overstretched. So I think it's a really good way of bringing all that together and being able to work together to make change.